Hey there, and welcome back to the Total Potential Podcast. It's Cole. I am super jazzed today to be joined by Dr. James Leonette. He is an award-winning chiropractor and has all these incredible subspecialties that he has trained in. And I mean, we're talking things from functional medicine to epigenetics and to the topic we get to share with him today, which is on childhood neurodevelopment disorders. And oh my gosh, I just cannot wait to share these very usable, sensible strategies that yes can help children who are working through diagnoses such as ADHD and OCD and autism, but oh my gosh, they just apply so broadly to the way kids are developing these days with greater technology, more sedentary lives. And these tools are just incredible ways for us to tap into how we can help our kids. So let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Leonette to the podcast. Hey there, Jimmy. How are you today?
Doing great, Cole. How about yourself?
Good. I'm so glad to have you here. I really appreciate you joining us. There's some things that we get to share. Well, you get to share. I get to just be curious and ask about around childhood neurodevelopment today. But that's like a really specific area of practice. I'd really be interested to know, what are some of the more formative events that led you to even be interested in chiropractic as a profession, and then more specifically kind of down this road to the childhood neurodevelopment.
Yeah, so just going into becoming a chiropractor, I worked for Food and Drug Administration, and I traveled a lot, and I was having migraines specifically, and I walked into this guy's office, and there's loud music playing, people were laughing, it was just fun. I'd never been into a doctor's office that was just fun. People were running up and down the hallways. I don't even know what the hell they were doing. And I was like, you know what? I came home and told my wife, I said, that's what I want to do. I want what this guy has. And it wasn't 3 months later, we had packed up our car, sold our house, and moved to Iowa. So it was
Oh
about
my
700
gosh.
miles away. Yeah. I was fortunate to be mentored by this wizard. I call him a wizard because he did structure, energy, emotion, nutrition. So we did everything from acupuncture to really detailed clinical nutrition. So um, I was ability to work with these really tough neurologic cases straight out of chiropractic school. We had referrals from Walter Reed Hospital, neurologists from all around Virginia for the alternative hands-on techniques. And then I opened up my own practice. And then a few years later, like my youngest son, he's now 7. He was kind of having some developmental delays, and I didn't really know what to do with him or where to take him. And I took him around to my friends that were functional neurologists, and I was like, you know what, you guys do some really cool work. Let's see what's out there for specifically for kids, so I could help him.
Yeah.
I came across some work that Dr. Robert Malillo has developed, and studied that, and then have taken that and kind of put my own spin on it. And but I follow his research approved methods, and it's been just amazing work with that.
Wow. So what would you say are some of the more common, I don't love the word disorders. What are some of the more common diagnoses that end up coming to see you that, your brain kind of goes into this, that there's something developmentally that can be done rather than just, from a medication standpoint
Right.
for
So
kids?
yeah, I'd like to look at it as just like there's an area of weakness. And so it just didn't mature on the same timeline. So we kind of break it down into right and left hemispheres. So if one area is kind of underdeveloped or not performing real well, when it's time for the certain areas to mature and that side of the brain, and the other side's doing a little bit better system with it, it's going to go all or none. It's going to shift the dominance to the other side. So what you end up with is a hemisphere that's taking on roles and duties that it wasn't necessarily designed for. And we just need to restore the balance with that.
Okay.
As far as diagnosis, I mean, that shows up as a lot of syndromes, and I like to use the word syndrome versus a disease or
Yeah.
condition. Where you have attention deficits, you have obsessive compulsive, you have tics, you have Tourette's, dyslexia. It all depends on what part of the brain is underperformed or what didn't mature at the correct rate.
Okay. Okay. So give me an example. Let's say somebody has really, well, is it more common to develop more heavily into the left brain or more heavily into the right brain? If kind of the pattern of development hasn't been quote unquote, it's, full natural scale, does one typically outweigh the other, or can it be one either way?
I think we're seeing a primarily in today's times a shift towards left brain dominance,
Okay.
which is the real analytical side. So in school, they're pushing a lot of maths, STEMs, and have reduced a lot of the arts and music, and those are more on the right side. The big global picture things are more on the right side. Let's just see, because of the way I guess maybe society is, and we've really pushed a lot on engineers and standpoint and scientists. And so any for the children's side, usually the ones that typically come in, the dad is a really, really, really good engineer
Hmm.
and does stuff from the bottom up. So it's even kind of hard to fathom a top-down approach to anything. Everything's, you build the world from little blocks up. You learn to read from little words up instead of grasping the big paragraph or the big book and what the whole content is. That is. So it's a long way of saying that I typically see a little bit more left brain strong and right brain weaknesses.
Okay.
But it also kind of goes with what kind of uh, symptoms the person's exhibiting as well.
Sure. Okay. So if somebody comes to you and they're exhibiting this left brain dominance, for instance, how on earth do you start to train or develop or start to lean into that right brain development to get more of a balanced approach from left to right?
Yeah, so we just follow nature's blueprint, which is already there. Um, we do activities to stimulate the right hemisphere, but more importantly, you go back to what the development process is. A lot of this is these primitive reflexes. So just coming out of the womb, you have programming already installed. So it could be to turn your head, to lift your cheek so that you can be fed. It can be turning your head, turning your arms so you can get out of the womb. It
Hmm.
can be putting your neck back and pushing your belly out. There's even things that aren't so much mechanical, but are also visceral. So we have a leaky gut. You've heard a lot about leaky guts in the past, and that is a design so you can absorb nutrients from your mother's breast milk because they're
Hmm.
large molecules. So we go through and we test looking at these primitive reflexes. So there's, move the head up and down. We look for response, side to side, look for response, take a light brush to the face. We look for a certain response. There's a grip, palmar grip. There's a reflex on the bottom of the feet, and there's ones on the back. And so we look at those to start. Those seem to be the primary primitive reflexes. There's others, but those are the ones we usually start with. And we see if they are integrated.
Hmm.
If basically we can perform the tests and there's no response, which is ideal. But if there is, now we have an input into the system, starting from the brain stem up, to make a brain rebalancing.
Fascinating. Okay, a little side peel here because this was a weird insight for me. I have my oldest is 16 years old. He's a, you know, very well integrated young man, but he had quite a lot of sensory challenges when he was a young guy. And I will never forget the OT tested the Babinski reflex, the bottom of the feet. And my God, if his whole foot didn't just whoom, like curl on itself. And to this day, he does not like having the bottom of his feet touch. But okay, so these types of reflexes, if they have been integrated through, kind of normal development of an infant toddler, those would then have no reaction when you go to say test a 9-year-old. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, most of
Okay.
those they will integrate by a 1 year. Some of them are 4 to 6 months. Some of them are a little bit later, but yeah, by about a year, we would anticipate those would be gone.
Okay. And so if they're still present, then that's a clue that there's some deep primitive reflexes that can maybe be a starting point for how you work with somebody. Is that
Yeah, so
correct? Okay.
that's a sign that the brain hasn't fully matured.
Okay.
It's also a good thing. Yeah, so based off of that, some questionnaires, case history, if you if the dad's a real strong engineer, and it's a male son, you can pretty much bet that kid's also going to be a real strong left brain. But if the
Hmm.
dad's a global artist or then we can probably look at it from a right brain standpoint. But there's some giveaways when you start talking with the kids or the parents, and on top of like some of the qualified checklists and questionnaires we have. And then from there, we would do stimulation real specific to the hemisphere that we want to activate. So it's not just go and do that, but you would do 20 on one side, 10 sides on 10 on the other, or whatever the prescription is going to be to activate or stimulate a certain hemisphere of the brain more than the other side.
Okay. And then as you work through that stimulation, that then is turning the brain on to start to take over more of the functions that it typically is responsible for, or are there other steps along the way to, well, I'm sure there are more steps along the way, but but is it that just training mechanism that then helps recalibrate kind of the balance between the hemispheres, or are there other things that you end up having to take into consideration?
Yeah, there's other things to take into consideration, but what we're working on is a bottom up approach. So we're looking from the brainstem, the medulla, the pons, midbrain, and then the cerebellum, which is does balance coordination, does a lot of integration. All those areas have to work really, really well before you can get this prefrontal area, which does executive function and high thought and cognition and self. Um, and so we have to develop the lower parts before we can develop the higher parts. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so we'll look at the primitive reflexes in one area. There's also postural reflexes. So that's one of those where like you lay a baby backwards, their arms will go out like this and go wee,
Hmm.
versus an adult who put their arms out this way and prevent their head from being injured. And so we can look at the postural reflexes and correct those if they need corrected. Um, and then the next level we go to is core strength,
Hmm.
because and a lot of people don't realize if your child is 5, 6, 7, 8 years old and they have terrible handwriting, well, they probably don't have a stable core, and so then they're shaking around and they can't have a good handwriting because their core is unstable.
Hmm.
So we want to look to see, a kid at that age should be able to plank for a couple minutes. Can they plank for a couple minutes? You'd be surprised. Some can that I never thought would be able to. In fact, I had a 6-year-old autistic girl, and she got into a plank and pose and just hold it. She just had downs, and so that was even more incredible. And I was like, well,
Wow.
this is just some amazing core strength that she has. So that's not an area we needed to focus on. But a lot of times, just because of sedentary nature, the schooling and then the schoolwork and the lack of play, part of that contributes to reduced core strength. So we look at that. That's one of the things I harp on a lot of playtime, because
Yeah.
kids need to be out building strength and coordination.
Well, and even, I mean, so I teach yoga and Pilates, and we'll see like high level high school athletes who will come, to get stretchy instead of lifting weights for a day. And like even the big guys who look really strong and have, incredible coordination, they tend to have really low, like deep core strength. And you put them in a plank and they're like, how quickly can I get out of this? So, you know, is it present in kids from, lack of being out and playing and all that stuff? For sure. But by gosh, my experience is that is a really pervasive issue across ages and stages and jobs and athleticism and everything right now. Um, so yeah, for anyone listening, ding ding ding, your core might be a place to spend some more time. What what are some of like, okay, let's say you're thinking about your 5-year-old and they're writing their first letters, and holy Hannah, it seems like handwriting might be a big challenge for them. And if you're thinking about it from this core perspective, outside of hey, just get out and play, are there other, like little simple things that somebody listening can be like, oh yeah, I could try that at home with my kiddo?
I would just put them in a push-up position and make it a game.
Okay.
Yeah, so put them on a push-up position and just have them hold it. I know even with my boys, when my wife's downstairs working out, they'll go down and work out with her. and just making it fun. And then, doing on different levels. So it's having a ball or like two basketballs and put their hands on there. Well, that's fun, or different levels. It doesn't need to be very complicated. That's the thing with core strength. It's not complicated. And if you look at us right now, I know your podcast, but we're sitting down, right?
Hmm.
So in today's environment, we put a lot of emphasis on like our anterior hip flexors being tight and our low back and glutes being off. And then when we stand up, a lot of people will swing out of a chair. So they use
Mm.
momentum. So, from our standpoint, just sliding to the edge of the chair and slowly standing up, which is a squat, will activate the glutes. It's going to activate the abdominal transversus so that we build core strength up just on highly repetitive
Sure.
routines instead of actually having to add in, you don't want to go and sit and do 400 crunches because that's going to actually work your hip flexors and not so
Yeah.
much your abdominal transversus and the muscles that we really care about. And then one of the other key things that I teach all the time in my clinic is breathing patterns.
Mm.
Your diaphragm, 2/3 of it's for moving air in and out of the lungs, and about 1/3 of it's used for lumbar stabilization or low back stabilization. So it's a really easy access point to building up core strength. So if you want to look at your kids and you ask them just to go do a short, quick run out the sidewalk and come back, if they're raising their shoulders, frantically trying to breathe, well, the child's probably not belly breathing. They're in a sympathetic dominant state. And so they've already lost part of their low back core stabilization just from inability to breathe correctly. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things in yoga, you can easily turn on the diaphragm and rework the postures.
Yeah. Hmm. I love it. Anytime we can come back to breath, I'm usually a happy camper. It's very
So much
cool.
value in that. The other two areas I wanted to mention, we look at the primitive reflexes, posture reflexes, core strength, and then you have your vestibular and your oculomotor systems. So we have what coordinates us in balance. So we're upright beings. So we have evolved or developed to balance this big noggin over our feet. It takes a lot of energy to do that. So we've made some trade-offs. And part of the theory is that's why we have such a large frontal cortex, is that we can work on all the coordination needed to be upright, to carry these
Hmm.
big brains around. And so we have to make sure that the vestibular system and the cerebellar goes in there as well, that those systems that coordinate movement operate properly. So there's some really neat tests where you can shut somebody's eyes, just have them march in place and just see if they spin to the right or the left. And that gives us hints if their balance and their sense of proprioception where they are in space is appropriate. And maybe it needs some work if not.
Yeah. Okay. Something that really strikes me about coming at some of these challenges, right? Because I'm imagining being the parent of a kid who's been diagnosed with ADHD, and all the conversations I have to have with teachers, and this soliloquy of events that ends up happening from this one diagnosis, and what ends up being labeled as like a behavior problem, and then coming at it from this very different approach of that we can train the body brain system to have a different experience. And I'm imagining as a parent, if I'm listening, thinking like, whoa, there could be this whole other avenue to explore for my child, that it would feel, number one, very empowering, and number two, like a massive relief. Like that there is something specific and actionable that we could do as a family, with professional help, to really vastly impact what my child's life is like and what their life in school or with friends or on sports teams or whatever is like. What is that like from your perspective, seeing kind of, the person who comes in, and then what becomes available to that person, child, family, after having these things that is just like, no, we're going to integrate your system and give you a new experience. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, well, from a professional standpoint, it's very fulfilling to see these changes. There are a couple things that are needed. Number one is buy-in from the parents.
Mm,
We do some of the work in the clinic, but a lot of it is repetition, and it involves the parents being on them to do it over and over and over, because you have to think, it was a lot of this stuff developed from, our brain development comes from crawling, right?
mm.
And if you sped out, you basically skip the crawling stage, which is a couple months of crawling. We need to make that up. You still need the stimulation equivalent of crawling. Now, as an adult, you can, or an older kid, you can usually do it in less time. It's not going to take, it's not equal amounts of time, but there's a lot of work that needs to go in to making this occur. And it has to be real specific. As far as, like, speaking to the parents, I love that this is it's been a research validated approach, and the results have been proven. So it's not just me saying, oh, I get these results, but there's Harvard studies done on this. A lot of it involves its integration of the primitive reflexes and its use of interactive metronome for cerebellar timing.
Mm,
In fact, I was just reading an article yesterday, or earlier this week, and it talked about cerebellar timing and rhythm. So it's rhythm, increases your connection to other humans. And so if you have good rhythm, you have better connection. And so that's what the cerebellar and the lower brainstem development helps with.
mm,
So you see people with ADHD that they kind of have that offset gaze, and they don't really look people in the eye because they don't have the connection to them. So by improving their response to these reflexes and the cerebellar timing, they can make a human-to-human connection, and actually increase emotional intelligence
mm.
dramatically too. And how would that affect the dynamic in your house? It's enormous.
Yeah,
Well, I'm even
that's
guilty of
life
this.
changing.
Yeah, even with my little one, and we've done the work and we do the work, and sometimes I'm still in the old habits of going, oh, he's not going to pay attention. He'll just turn around and have a full-on conversation with me, and it's still, from a personal standpoint, it still floors me at how when you get them back on the right stage of development, how they change and can meet their maturity standards.
Mm. And that, gosh, that, I mean, it just feels like such a warm thing, right? Like, our whole platform is dedicated to how do we give people the tools so that they can create their best case scenario, like what they want and desire from their family life. And I think something that strikes me about this conversation is that as a parent, you don't hand select every quality of your child, right? And you have this beautiful gift that comes into the family and has its own complete set of circumstances that have nothing to do with what you were hoping for. Like, and yet what a gift it can be to see a challenge through,
Yeah.
right? And what then becomes possible because you did that work together and you did get the reps in and you did do the homework that the chiropractor gave you, and like just really committed to it. And now there's this whole other thing that's available that wasn't available before. And that's, to me, where like it just gets so exciting to be able to learn even about these kinds of resources. Something, so you're the first person I have ever talked to, actually. And I've been doing somatic work for a number of years. You're the first person I've ever talked to who has had this approach to what we, otherwise have all these diagnoses and medications prescribed for. And something that strikes me is like, okay, well, if you're the first person I've ever talked to as a person who's interested in this, how in the world does somebody go about finding this type of resource, and doesn't need to be in person, doesn't need to be in their own community? Is this something that can be done virtually online with somebody? Like, how does a person start to seek these resources if they're having the aha moment of, wow, I could really do something different?
Yeah, that's it took me a while even to find the resources, but once I did, we're very fortunate that right now there's a lot of doctors being trained, not
Mm,
just chiropractors, but some of the classes I've been with, speech pathologists, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists. We've even had counselors. I was in Texas, and I'm from West Virginia, and there was a dad. He was a dad of some kids, and he was taking all the courses himself. So
That's cool.
the community is definitely growing, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. And it's important. The brain is built on somatosensory, so body stimulation. So we need definitely need more practitioners like this. But in order to find a way to evaluate and work with your own children or yourself, I like to gear back. I mean, I always recommend finding somebody that's been trained in it's called the Malillo method, or somebody that's a fellowship in the child neurodevelopmental disorders, because that shows that you've been trained, you've gone through and taken the fellowship course. There's actually a very good book. I'm going to hold it up here, and this is a great place to start. And I give one of these all out to my clients that come in. It's Dr. Malillo's Disconnected Kids. And I love
Mm,
this because it's almost a checklist when you get into it, and so you can do some of the tests. And so you don't have to be
mm,
an expert at it to do the test to see, oh, my kid needs a little help. Maybe needs a more detailed evaluation, some hands-on. And so you can do this in a matter of intensives, where you come in for anywhere from 3 to 5 days or longer, depending on the severity. You can do, there are some doctors out there doing remote programs. I know mine's in the works, and it's it's just a lot of things I'm juggling right now, so that's coming
yeah.
on. And then there are just you can just check in for neurodevelopmental disorders, and there's some OTs, occupational therapists, that are doing similar work. Um, the difference that I love the OTs, and we have one here that we just work together really well. But I also like being able to do the structural corrections. I think it's one of the advantages that chiropractors have on this is
Mm,
we look at autonomic nervous system imbalance. So we look at how much fight or flight versus rest and digest they have, and we can actually put a force into different regions of the spine and make that correction. So we can stimulate, we can speed them up or slow them down on top of doing the mechanical correction. So it's kind of finding the right mix for what you have available in your area and what the child needs or what the person needs.
yeah. We'll definitely share that the Disconnected Kids book just as a way to even check in. Like, does this make any sense for my kid and what we're experiencing before, diving even deeper into it? Something that kind of strikes me as you talk about, how things change for the kids is, what do you notice that parents notice in themselves? Because I'm imagining, right, if you're working with my kid and working on core stabilization, I'm thinking to myself, hmm, what needs to happen for me? Like, do you see a lot of that pairing where it's what's happening for the kid, the parent benefits and needs and practices and makes changes as well?
I've yet to have a kid come in where the parent didn't show up as a patient themselves
Oh,
in a
interesting.
short period of time, because once the veil's kind of been lifted, you've seen where there's some concerns with your children, you look in the mirror and you see where that is for you. um, the nice thing is, if you have the book, that the parent can test themselves,
Hmm.
or maybe have someone else help test them. And so they're typically, depending on the age of the child, they might be on the floor doing the lizard exercises with them. So the brain is still going to adapt to that. Like it's not going wasted. So repetition would be really good for developing coordination and, in fact, improving their brain. I would recommend, if you don't know what you're doing as far as what parts are weak, just do equal on both sides and take it as a normal gym workout or a core strength workout. So if you're doing lizards and you're doing 20 to one side, might as well do 20 to the other and let your kids stop at 10.
Yeah.
Just so you don't mess yourself up, because any input is going to affect the nervous system. Now, we have a lot more resilience in our system if we've developed properly, where you can do that. You could we see carpenters run a drill or a hammer on their right side all day long, and that activates the left hemisphere of the brain. And it doesn't mess them up too much because they've adapted. They've been able to adapt to that. So then they use their left hand for other things, but it's also at to balance that vibration. Um, so as far as parents, like, they'll get some benefit just out of doing the exercises too.
Yeah. So cool. Say a little bit more about coordination because, I think I'll just use myself as an example. Like I was a pretty good athlete. I could coordinate movement with some ease when it was really directional, but I'll be darned if I am not like one of the klutziest people just like moving around daily. Um, what might somebody look for kind of their own level of coordination if there's more to train there? And yeah, let's go there first because then I have some more questions about it after.
Yeah, balance and coordination, it involves a lot of different areas of the brain, in a lot of different areas. First, you know, I ask somebody that's having coordination issues, when you eat, can you feel the food in your stomach? And 3 hours later, can you feel that? Right? If you're sitting here right now, or you're in your car listening, without even thinking about it, can you feel your knees? How bent are they?
Hmm.
So part of it is body awareness. And a lot of people don't have the proprioception or body awareness, or because of trauma, they've decided to decrease the amount of stimulus that they come up from their body. And so I like to use the example that I have some friends that will go to the gym and, they're 200 pounds and they're deadlifting 400 to 500 pounds. In fact, I was one of those guys. And it was one of those where you're just looking for stimulation. So when can you feel your knees? When can you feel your hamstrings? And do you have the ability to feel it at different angles and at different tension?
Hmm.
Right. So we have that. And then we also have, feeling the tension, but can also, do you know where you are in space? Right. So when you're seated and you're in the chair, you can feel your butt on the chair. You're not going to go too far, but if you stand up and shut your eyes and stand on one foot, where are you getting your input from? We
Hmm.
have the vestibular system. We have the balance within the ears. We have muscles on the back of the skull that are called suboccipital muscles. Those are muscle spindles. They help to tell you they're sensory. They're sensory muscles more than they are movement muscles. We have the visual horizon. We have the vertical skew, and then we also have sensory input coming up from the feet. And so all these have to work in harmony. If they're on top of like the otoliths that control what the eyes raise, lower, twist, and torsion, they all have to work in harmony. If there's a breakdown in one of those systems, then the brain's got a way is, what's the most appropriate, what's basically what wins,
Hmm.
which systems we listen to. And every once in a while it listens to the wrong system and it takes that one, and then you become off a cue. And so part of that is repetition usually does it. Now, first you have to fix up any disease states. So if there's some crystals wrong in the ears, the otoliths are messed up, you've had an eye issue or a weak eye or a lazy eye, and we have to work on some strength. You have to look at that first. If there's some structural issues, we have to look at that as well. But a lot of it might just be learning to clap again, but which is one of the things we do with the interactive metronome. We teach people how to clap with two hands. We teach them how to clap one side, the other side, their feet, and to get in rhythm. And we time them. So it says whether it comes in early or whether it comes in late. And it's all about repetition, repetition, repetition in order to regain that rhythm and that movement coordination. And it's fascinating. You get better coordination, better proprioception, but on top of that, you can actually pick up. Some people have never felt rhythms to music, or couldn't sing, or
Hmm.
couldn't you listen to music and you don't know why you like it. Well, part of it is you can hear it, and maybe the beat's always like a 3 count or whatever it is. And so that's easy enough, but you can't get into more sophisticated music because you don't have the ability to process those higher, or those different rhythms. And so by doing the balance and cerebellar training, you can actually enjoy music better. And you can actually experience, again, better connection. So it's not just balance by
Yeah.
itself.
Holy guacamole. I need to be clapping, I think.
Yeah, there's an app I use, just one I send home. It's Soundbrenner. It's on an iPhone, but it's one where you can tap and it'll set. It's a metronome and it'll set to it. And it's not designed for this, but you can tap and say I want to set it at 60 beats per minute, and you'll just use one finger, and then you can go to the other side and you can just use the other finger, and then you can it's just an easy way at home before you get into like sophisticated tools to see basically where you are and see,
Yeah.
oh, this one's going at 55 or 50 and this one's at 62. Well, might need to work on that a little bit.
So I have homework. This is exciting. um, say a little bit more about resilience in the system, because I think the way mental toughness, resilience, the way those are kind of discussed out in the world right now, it's very like the brain has a job to do. But what I hear you saying is that the nervous system has a job to do to increase our resilience. Is there more that comes up for you around that topic from like a body brain connection standpoint?
Yeah. So they interface so close. So the body sends input to the brain and allows the brain to develop. But then if essentially you cut off your body sensations to the brain, you don't have the capacity to sense small and varying degrees, right? So you
Mm,
go back to the food thing. You don't know when you've eaten, but haven't eaten to the full capacity. And so just building that into your system where you know what your limits are without going to the point where you have to break them in order to experience a nervous system stimulation.
mm,
So, if you have to repeatedly go and deadlift 500 pounds, but 500 pounds is at the level where it shears your low back disc and causes injury, but that's the only way you've been deadlifting is to go to that level. Well, eventually you're going to hurt yourself, right? But if you can sense and go less, you can go sub max, you go to 400 pounds and you can start adding reps and reps and reps. You'll build it up as a strength. So you build up the
mm.
muscles around it. So you'll be able to do more without injuring yourself. But you have to be able to sense what that is in order to be able to know what your limits are and kind of the percent that you should be working at in order to build that strength in your system, to build some resilience. I don't take it just as all mind over matter or just
Yeah.
mental toughness, because that's you can overwill something for so long, but that's not the way we were designed. It's not what we were intended to do, right? So we
Yeah.
want to work within our physiologic limits and not break them. I love David Goggins' book. Have you read his book? Can't Hurt
I
Me?
haven't read the book. I listened to him on podcasts and all that kind of good stuff.
He is an amazing individual, but he pushed the body past what the mind has set as the governor for it. And so, he talks about duct taping his tibias, his lower legs, because he broke them in bud school. And not once, but he did this multiple times. And then he would continue to run in excess of the requirements for bud school. He'd also run home and run back just to be better. So he went past built resilience into his brain doing that, but he also broke his body. So you have
Mm,
to find where that trade-off is, where you get maximal benefits and you don't get burned out in the process of trying to build up your brain and trying to build up your body.
yeah. So that's kind of on the one end where it's almost like the need is so high, the threshold needs to be so high to even be able like, oh, I'm in my body right now, the 500-pound example. Do you see where it's like way on the other end where someone's almost like hypersensitive to any amount of input? Or do you more often see the excessive?
Yeah, yeah. So some of those are like we talk about it from a kid's standpoint. You see a kid when you put them in a new room or you take them to a doctor's office and they're going into the corner or they're screaming and they grab something and they're defending themselves. So that's a primitive reflex. It's called a fear paralysis reflex.
Mm,
And so that can be worked on. You work on that. There's also another one called a Moro reflex. So if you come up behind them and you clap and they jump, or somebody's really jumpy, they haven't integrated in that Moro reflex, which is a startle response. And so we have somebody that's hypersensitive. We're going to start there. We're going to look at that reflex and do there's physical movements that you can go through to integrate that reflex. And then over time, as that sensitivity comes down, um, the person gets more into their body. So they're out of their brain, more out of their brain, more into their body, and then they can sense, and then they actually have a idea of, not just an idea, they have an experience of the world around them. So for example, now that they know that they're holding a cup, right? And it's not the thought of holding a cup. It's not the thought of, I have to make my arm move this way to get there, but they're actually getting sensory feedback that they're holding a cup. And it's not the fear of, oh, I'm going to tip it. Does it have a lid? Am I going to spill this? You know? So as you can get them more back into their body, they have the ability to experience life without constant states of fear.
Hmm.
Now, from an adult standpoint, we see this a lot too. We talk about people that are always in their head, right? And they have constant head chatter. And so
Hmm.
it goes back and forth, and it's always, a lot of times it's negative. Sometimes it's just constant movement. So those, if we talk about this from an adult standpoint or a little bit older, we need to shift them back down into their body. And we can do that through this, again, the same pattern. We look for primitive reflexes, postural reflexes, vestibular system, balance, coordination, eye movements, and find out where they're having some issues. And we just strengthen up those issues, and it helps to course correct the entire system.
It's incredible. And something that stands out to me as you're saying this, especially, on more of like the adult spectrum, is that we're so highly rewarded currently in our society for being as if we're like a brain sitting on a stick figure. Like, just, the mental capacity of work life these days, of the way school is. I mean, there's just so many things where we are just trapped inside of our brain. And what a enormous opportunity exists for, whether that's movement, whether that's more specific, measures like you're talking about that integrate, but anything that can hold, like, just not shut the brain down. I mean, our brains are amazing, but anything that can just pull us into the body system just seems like we need a lot more of that. And I'm guessing that's your
Absolutely.
experience too.
Yeah, that's the embodiment movement. I've had a lot of conversations around that recently, and that's, part of that too is there's still some stigma attached with experiencing emotions and expressing emotions and being able to work with that. So that's one thing that takes you out of your body, as you've developed, or maybe you developed properly and now you've had some of these returned issues. And a lot of this, it's not so much to work it out, just to burn out the excess energy, which is, you'll see a lot of people do that. So they'll just go and they'll go run, a 50K, or they'll start running and just burn themselves out just because they get themselves to exhaustion. And when they get to exhaustion, then their brain can slow down enough for them to be able to process at like a normal speed versus shifting down. And actually going back down, going into your heart and going into your core and living life from that standpoint. So, in order to be able to get to that level, you have to be able to process in the upper part of your brain. So you have to do all the other steps to get the lower part of the brain to function properly, so that you can get to the higher functions, so that you can input more data or more programming there, so that you can calm your system down, so you can move it back down. So it's kind of a
Big.
complicated arc of it, but it all goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
And movement is a huge bit of it. What were we designed? We are endurance hunters.
Hmm.
We were designed to traverse long distances and be able to know, we're visual spatial. That's a water hole. This is a good place for where rabbits are. This is a great place for hunting elk. This is where berries are. And so we were designed for our brains to be in constant movement, be upright bipedal, and be able to take in a lot of sensory input, but be able to process it properly. But you're processing it while you're moving. You're not really processing it while you're stationary. We're making a lot of demands on our posture system in a seated posture, doing less, low input on our feet, or minimal input on our feet, to try and process a lot of usually visual information, not so much auditory, without feedback. Even this is interesting, because we get an emotional connection to somebody by mimicking their facial movements on a micro scale. So I could tell, even like looking at you on this podcast, right? You're sitting off to my left. You're not sitting directly in front of me. So already I have some skew with the hemispheres that are working in kind of my lobes. And I'm still, you're way smaller than what you would have been in person. And then trying to pick up, okay. And then, so I feel my face kind of mimicking yours, right? So I can go, oh, this is a sensation that she's having. So this is what my intuition says that she's having this kind of response, right? So as we do more and more as virtually or by text or by, email or non-person to person, it really skews how we develop even and evolve even as we're later in life.
Yeah. Geez. And recently I've been hearing more about like how micro breaks can help give space to the brain for processing, like for children learning in school, for instance. Um, but now I'm thinking like, holy buckets, add walking or marching or jumping or, something else on top of that. Because if the body, which we know plays such an important role, but can bridge that process even more and solidify that information and that knowingness, how cool that is too. Makes me really want to like overhaul how schools operate, but not in a
It
role to
does.
do
I
that
mean,
currently.
yeah, even from a school standpoint, you got to see the signs of when the kids are fatiguing and get them up, get them jumping, and realize that noise is normal, right? So get them up, get them moving, and then reset them. I know every time I've given a talk, and I go to the schools pretty regularly. I speak to the teachers, I speak to the kids, I go around to different businesses. Been on stage, and when I do that, the first thing I do is make everybody stand up and do windmills or something that just kind of breaks them out of their cycle. And then I'll just abruptly stop my talk right in the middle of a slide or whatever it is, and have them do it again.
Yeah.
And, because it helps to open somebody up and helps to get them fully engaged. And so, you learn in your body. And I'm also, a big believer that our posture is so critical for our state. So anybody that's going to sit in like a slumped position, there's postures that go in with that. There's programming that's gone in with that. So as we can correct the posture, we can get them upright. We can fix some of that's why I like to fix some of the structural issues. So we can correct their posture, chest out. And so, I mean, you look like you project confidence, but you also, if you're in that state where your shoulders down, shoulders back, head up, you're going to look somebody in the eye and you're going to be able to make a connection, and somebody's going to be willing to look you in the eye versus you going down. So it's going to improve that person to person relationships that you can have.
Which we need more of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would change a lot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. Big time. And where I work teaching yoga, we see so much of the down, but then up, I can't even like make it happen with my neck. But we spend a lot of time trying to help people correct just the neck posture of what it means to be in a tech driven world these days. We started talking about this a little bit before we hit record, but say a little bit about this beautiful blue room that you're in, because it just and how that's affecting the brain.
Yeah, so this is my home office, and I'm very fortunate. My wife helped me design it. So I primarily operate out of my left brain. So I'm analytical. I build systems from the bottom up, and that's how I see the world a lot of the times. But blue, we use blue glasses, blue color, so that stimulates the right hemisphere, and that helps to improve big picture views, top down, global. So when I'm in here brainstorming, building programs, reading articles, seeing how that can fit in with some of the information that I have, this is a very calming space.
Hmm.
And then there's also emotion attached with the colors, right? So blue is relaxing. So we definitely play into account of having a nice space that you feel like working in, but also having the stimulation that helps with drive the correct brain to help put me in a calm state.
Yeah. Okay, so blue's a right hemisphere color. Is there a left hemisphere
Yeah,
color?
it's gonna be your reds and
Okay.
oranges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And gosh darn it, we my kids and I, the whole like red is like a act now, do something now. And every fast food brand, everything that wants you to like snap, make a decision, I'll be darned if their brand and their logos aren't all red, yellow, and orange. And I'm just like, darn it all. Where's the great place that has a nice blue, beautiful logo that
And part of that,
draws
yeah,
us in?
part of that is they want you in and they want you out. So they want you to
Yeah.
move fast. And the red is left, and it's a quick decision. Let's get in here. This is good enough for right now, and get in and get out. When you look at the blues, you're probably gonna be looking at like the longer, the high end steak diners and things like that when you look at the logos. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole psychology to the colors that I don't even really deal with. I just, from a neurology standpoint, I keep red glasses, I keep blue glasses, I keep so I use part of those for take home, and we add that in with the exercises. And then there's auditory stimulation too. So what you can't see is I have a surround speaker system too, and I drive right and left. If I need input, if I want to do more right, I can push up the right speaker so I get more input into the right side of my brain. If I feel like I want to
Hmm.
get more analytical, I push it up into the left side. So I have some fun with the speakers as well. There's
Yeah.
all kinds of biohacking you can do with this once you really get into it. But don't experiment around until you know what you're doing, because then it's like having to unravel something to be able to get to the state that we need to work from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you'd want to know you're going in the right direction before going.
Yeah.
No holds bar. Awesome. Well, I just really want to thank you for sharing this. I mean, what for me is like a whole new perspective on how we can really support and empower our kids. And gosh, it's just exciting to feel like, there's a whole nother path available. So I just really appreciate you sharing with us and spending time with us. Where should people go if they're interested in learning more about you or the work that you do?
So my website is enbrain.health, enbrain.health. From there, I have the front page. I have the research article written by Dr. Malillo, so it's right there. My contact information is on there, and feel free to write into me or schedule a call. It's on the lower right side. There's so much we didn't even talk about with and one thing I do want to add in here is
Please.
a lot of the stimulation that or treatments involve global changes. So we talk about medications, right? And they work short term, but the studies show they don't really work long term because there's no specificity to it. It lifts or it suppresses the entire global brain system for the most part. Now, there are some that have some variances with that, but specificity matters. So finding where the weakness is and where the dysfunction is and correcting that dysfunction will far give you outweigh anything else than on a medication side. So I just if you have a kid or you have yourself or having some brain or some body issues, go to somebody that has this information and can help you assess you and get you back to a better way of living.
Yeah. You know, gosh, to your point about the medication and long-term effects, it's like, wouldn't you so much rather have a solution where it's like you're at least marching forward,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And there's a time and a place, and I will happily work with people on their medications.
For sure.
And there's some times where it's just absolutely needed, but we can also correct around that.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
we want to find balance based off of somebody's centered and create them a new level of being based off of a good posture, without, if possible, without any kind of biochemical dependence. But there's just some times where that's just needed, and
For
that's no
sure.
problem. We'll build strength around the system with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and for everybody listening. And we will catch you guys next time.